Occupy Wall Street. Well, whatever you think of the ideology and principles expressed by the protesters, you have to marvel at their methods. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, and this time on Trifecta, we ignore the message and explore the medium and the methods of these Occupy Wall Street protesters with my colleague Stephen Green from Monument, Colorado, and Bill Whittle from Los Angeles. Well, the bloody zombie costumes, the confrontations with police, the chanting, the obscenities, the violence to horses. These aren't tactics from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Stephen, are the protesters simply ignorant about how to make their message attractive to non-believers, or are they intentionally offending regular folks for a strategic purpose?
Scott, this is genius. It's pure genius. You might watch these antics or look at these kids and call them ignorant, or offensive, counterproductive even, but let's look at the facts. Fewer than 5% of Americans identify themselves as communists or socialists, only about 20% liberal. Democratic pollster Doug Schoen put out a poll on Tuesday, and it shows that the demonstrators are way outside the mainstream. His words, way outside the mainstream. And yet Rasmussen, a right-wing pollster, he found out that Occupy Wall Street has a 54% favorable rating. That's twice as popular as the Tea Party is today. So you see, you poop on a cop car, you knock over a horse, and people are going to love you. I think we can learn a lot from these kids.
Well, Bill, you understand story and iconography, I think, better than most. Has there been a studied attempt to create a narrative here among these protesters? And in terms of communication impact, does it really matter whether the meta message is intentional or accidental?
Are you asking me if these Occupy Wall Street protesters are trying to construct a narrative, Scotty? They can't construct a sentence. They can't spell. They can't read. They can't add. They're unemployed because they're unemployable. So no, they're not trying to construct a message. They're children. They're children in the middle of their parents' dinner party who come out and take a leak in the punch bowl for attention. That's what they are. Now, with that said, this entire message thing is remarkable, and Steve's point about the polling is remarkable because it goes once again to the power of the news media. If a Tea Party protest lasts for 2 hours and leaves the parade ground cleaner than it was when they got there, people expressing opinions without any contempt or any violence or any threats or anything like that, if that is polling half of what these violent, threatening, base, raw, rude, disgusting, filthy children are doing, then that tells you that the power of the medium to construct this message for you is almost beyond our ability to understand.
And they tell you the story, then they poll to find out what you thought of their story, and then they tweak it. On a related note, Rupert Murdoch, the chairman of News Corp, which owns Fox as well as an educational software company, was giving a speech in San Francisco when he was interrupted by protesters in the so-called Occupy Sesame Street movement. These protesters were decrying corporate domination of public education. Well, Stephen, you know, you pay for expensive tickets to a nice dinner with your wife to hear a famous businessman speak, and someone stands up in front of you wearing an Elmo head and starts shouting talking points. Does this make you want to log into their website or grab a brochure to learn more about their cause? And if not, why do they do it this way?
Scott, I don't know why you, and especially Bill, are so down on these kids. And forget the polls on this one. I know you don't put much stock in those, so instead, let's look at my own firsthand experience. And I can tell you, Muppets are one of the most effective ways of getting a message across. My 1-year-old watches Sesame Street, and he already knows about the letter D and the number 2, and about how the working class exclusively, by its own efforts, is able to develop only trade union consciousness. This stuff works, Scott. You can't deny it. I think next time you need to host a segment devoted to patting these giant Muppet people on their furry backs. It'd do you some good.
I think I saw an Occupy Wall Street protester leaning against a police car with his pants down who knew about the number 2 as well. That was Stephen Green. He entertains and informs you on PJTV.com with his shows Hair of the Dog, The Weekend Blogs, and Coast to Coast Tea Party. Well, Bill, the Occupy Wall Street movement seems to be growing either because of or in spite of its methods, and you and I are clearly not their intended audience. But if we simply dismiss or just ridicule them because we're offended, do we risk missing a social and political trend that may have real significance, or for that matter, an opportunity to educate these passionate but naive young people?
They're uneducatable, Scott. That's my starting position, and I'm sticking to it. As far as what our response to the movement is, listen, the left from its inception, the modern left in the 60s, has been about riot, has been about lawlessness, has been about just rolling around in the mud and stamping their feet and kicking and screaming and crying and whining about things that are impossible to give and things that they don't deserve. So I say let them do what they want to do. And let me just simply say this. When you have protests that actively say things like class war is coming and the hammer and sickle and Che and all this other stuff, people have often mocked people like me for being armed and quiet about it. Now you know why. You go to a Tea Party protest, you don't hear anybody talking about we're going to go to the streets and we're going to murder these people in Congress and you better get ready because the big Tea Party war is coming. We sit there quietly and we follow the rules and we obey the laws and we win or lose in the polls. So if you want to know what the message of these people is, just read their signs and be prepared because these people are not kidding. They have no morals. They have no integrity. They're a bunch of thugs and criminals, and they are going to get what they want.
Bill Whittle, co-founder of DeclarationEntertainment.com, is the creator of Afterburner on PJTV and co-host of Klavan, Whittle, and You. Well, it's puzzling, really, why people who wish to start a broad-based movement to change the country would behave in ways that they must know will cause the broad swath of middle America to reject and even ridicule them. You see, what they do speaks so loudly that we can't hear what they're saying. So if they're intentionally marginalizing themselves by acting out, they're either foolish or they have a strategic plan that doesn't require our consent. Now, given the way that Occupy Wall Street has been embraced by the major labor unions, socialist and communist and even Nazi organizations, leading Democrat politicians, Nancy Pelosi, and President Obama himself, I'll let you decide which scenario seems more likely. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.